Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 49 of Black and Azul. Joel Soria with you here alongside with Jamon Moore and Alex Morgan. 24 hours just about removed from, I think, the Quakes' most painful loss under Matias Almeida, a 5-1 drilling at Bank of California Stadium in the heart of Los Angeles to an LAFC that lacked some of its firepower. No Atuesta, no Carlos Vela, and they were able to get past by Matias Almeida's men with ease. Jamon Moore, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Joel.
Alex, welcome to the show.
Oh.
So much to talk about. Obviously, given the result, a lot of backlash from fans, a lot of pressure now on Matias and his players to turn it around, with not so much of a cushion, given that the team is on the outside looking in, trying to make playoffs, and they have a game up against the Colorado Rapids this weekend on Saturday. What do you guys make of the game yesterday?
Joel, I think this result rocked the Quakes pretty hard. They built a lot of momentum at the MLS back tournament, and I think they've been telling themselves that if they just keep doing what they're doing, then they're on track to make more consistent improvements and keep themselves in the race for the playoffs. But I think a loss of this magnitude shows that what they're doing just isn't enough, that they'll need to make significant changes and significant reinforcements to be competitive in this league. And I think that realization is going to be tough for them to stomach. It'll require a huge mental reset for this team. And I think Almeida recognized that, actually. He spent about an hour and a half, talking to his team after the game before he finally emerged for his post-match press conference. We thought they'd already boarded their flight back home by that point. But he spent a long time talking to the team, and he looked pretty tired afterwards. And he gave us some pretty revealing insights, I think. He sounded like he was at a crossroads, an inflection point in the progression of this team.
Jamon, how do you summarize last night's debacle in Los Angeles?
Well, I mean, it was 3 straight halves. You take the second half of the LA Galaxy, I think of an Earthquakes team that we really haven't seen yet. One that was unable to possess the ball, one that was unable to move the ball, and one that was completely unable to stop the opposition. In fact, they had former player Danny Masovsky, who played at Reno last year, who lit them up for a great goal, toward the end. The only saving grace, we finally got to see Danny Houston be able to get a goal and do something. But if you take a look at the way that the game played out, I'm looking right now at the G Plus game flow from Gameflow XPG on Twitter for the game. I mean, there's just so little blue. They just didn't do anything. They didn't shoot. They didn't move the ball. They couldn't play through the back. We'll talk more about that later. It was the most inept I think I've seen an Earthquakes team since 2018.
We did have to wait over an hour to speak to Almeida, but El Pelado did talk to us following that wait, and he had quite the quotes. One really stuck with me, and that was one that took about 3 minutes. It took about a 3-minute response to get it through. Let's go ahead and go over that quote. So the question that I asked Matias Almeida was, I get a lot of comments and questions from fans via Twitter, and obviously on the show here on Black and Azul, about when the Quakes are going to spend big on the roster. Not too long ago, Jesse Fiorinelli told the Mercury News, specifically Elliot Ullman, that the Quakes are thinking about signing 2 players in the coming months and 2 this winter. My questions are, how much autonomy will Matias Almeida have during those 2 transfer windows? And do you think 4 players will suffice to get the team where you want it to be? He responded, first, if we get carried away every comment on social media, I'd be crazier or in the clouds. It'd be disrespectful for me to talk about future players today because I'm currently coaching a squad that still has a lot of games to play. The possibility of strengthening the team is being studied, but first I want to know, what is the end of what I have? I have lived in many parts of the world working in soccer and playing it. And the easiest result that a coach can have is to say, change the 11 and bring me a new 11. And we stop working. Not everything is money. Not everything is buying. I believe in the confidence the players to lift themselves up like they did in Orlando. And if I became fixated on results, I would be a part of the rest of the pack, right? Because in Orlando, they congratulated me on each game because it was good. And now because we are doing badly, we start to dramatize that it is all useless. You have to have a middle ground in life. And the moments to make decisions are not these. The moments to make decisions are cold with analysis. And obviously, as a coach, we always want to have Messi, Luis Suarez, Cristiano Ronaldo, because they are the ones who mark the difference worldwide. There are teams that have invested more than San Jose. That is a reality. And we are only now going to be able to make a final analysis because there are contracts that are ending. I have not wanted to buy these contracts out. I have been respectful to each of the boys. When the time comes, we will make the appropriate decisions. But I'll tell you that I don't like to lose. Losing bothers me a lot. I like to win. I was able to win at all of the 3 teams I coached at. I came here because I believe in a project, and one day I will be a champion. I did not come to vacation. I came to work, and I like to win. It bothers me to lose, and it especially bothers me to lose the way we did tonight. Obviously, a lot to unpack in that 1,000-word response that Almeida gave us. A couple of things really stood out to me, and one of them is that Matias is right. This isn't the time to make drastic decisions. You're in the middle of the season and you have a lot of games to play. You're right. Maybe soccer isn't all about money. It's not all about buying the best player. Not everyone wants to take the Pep Guardiola approach. Not everyone wants to coach the PSGs of the world. No one wants to coach the Man Cities of the world. We get that. But the reality is that no one's over dramatizing last night's loss. I think that us and the majority of fans who closely monitor this team know that the Quakes have been in a place of little to no progress for far too long. The Almeida era was sold as something that was going to be different. But in my opinion, Almeida's lows have been lower than Mikel Starre's lows. Jamon, what stood out to you from this long-winded answer from El Pelado?
You know, I'm a person who tries to take the even approach, tries to be the even keel. And it's clear that's what Almeida is preaching for here, is that more patience is going to be needed, right? But I did get the sense, and I'm pretty sure I said it on this show. If not, I believe I said it on Twitter, that I think in Orlando, we saw the ceiling for this particular team. And since the loss to get kicked out of the tournament, we've seen 2 games that look very much like the loss that got them removed from the tournament. And you start to see a pattern. And the pattern emerges when you see the same thing happen game after game after game. And my concern is that Almeida is not seeing the pattern, or he's not able to react quickly enough to be able to make the changes given the highly compressed schedule that the entire league is forced to work under to fit in these 18 games since MLS is back. That the team goes right into a game on Saturday. There's a lot of players that looked beat by halftime of that last game. He had to make 2 substitutions on the outside backs because not only were they overrun, they were too tired to be able to play another half of soccer. And he had to make halftime substitutions. And, this roster, there's significant concerns that it's going to be able to hold up right now over these games. And I know he's trying to preach patience. And I'm out there saying, hashtag play the kids. And I get it. And I want to talk more about that a little bit later too. And we got to see a bit of that, but there's a level of risk that right now I think exists with this team. And given the remaining, games that they have in this batch of 6 games, they need to make it up against a team like the Rapids for sure on Saturday. And if they don't, I don't see it getting any better anytime soon.
I think that's absolutely right, Jamon. I thought that Almeida's response to Joel's question was honest and authentic. I think it was, suffused with dignity and passion and even a little vulnerability. The problem is that it's the same thing he's been saying for a year and a half now. One of the first Black and Azul shows that I did was after San Jose's 5-0 loss to LAFC last April. That was one of the lowest points of that year. It was in the midst of a lengthy losing streak. And in that show, I talked about how the Quakes won't be contenders in MLS until they completely overhaul the way the club is run. And here we are a year and a half later, and it's the same story. And I think the Quakes are certainly in a better place now than they were a year and a half ago. They're going to clear a lot of contracts off their books this winter. It's a more natural transition year. But they're also running out of time. I think Almeida's honeymoon period of grace is over now, and there are serious doubts about this team.
One of the other pieces within that quote that really stuck to me was the one that I actually published on Twitter. Somewhere in there, he mentions that he wants to be a champion with the San Jose Earthquakes and that he doesn't come here to vacation. And I get that. I really do buy it. I really do think that Matias and his coaching staff came here to do some real work, to do it with a lot of dignity, with a lot of respect, with a lot of character, and with a lot of passion. It has been an improvement. I will say that it has been an improvement to Mikel Starri's tenure. But the reality is that the Quakes, one of the main reasons why the Quakes are where they're at is because they've been ran the same way for a handful of years now. Ever since the 2012 season, the Quakes have been on a decline. It's like they got on this water slide that continues to gradually descend and descend and descend, but it doesn't seem to find the kiddie pool to land on. And in order for the Quakes, and in order for the Quakes specifically to be champions under Almeida, I think that there needs to be an in-depth change of how the team is ran. Matias talks about how he doesn't want players, about how he doesn't want a new 11, or about how it's not all about money. It's not a money game. But what really struck me was that not too long ago in 2018, Jason, if you could please bring up the screenshot, while at Chivas, a club that obviously has a lot of pressure involved. This is from Milenio, a reporter who writes for Milenio, someone who was intensely covering Chivas de Guadalajara at that time. The title reads, "To continue, Almeida wants 4 reinforcements." Now, we have to remember that during his tenure at Chivas, Matias Almeida was handed a huge purse. He went and signed Isaac Brizuela, he signed Alan Pulido, he signed Rodolfo Pizarro. He signed a ton of major elite Mexican players who were able to take him to the highest victories in Mexican soccer. And now here in San Jose, he's preaching something completely different. It could be that, his mindset on the game has completely changed over the course of 2 years, or it could be that he is speaking from a point where he really has nowhere else to go.
Yeah, there's just so much to unpack there, Joel. I think if he's going to be able to be a champion with the San Jose Earthquakes, there has to be some significant type of change that's going to bring about that championship. We saw, a team that was able to make the quarterfinals of the MLS's back tournament, and keep in mind that Almeida had very up and down seasons at Chivas. Where he really won his trophies was in the tournaments. And it's important, I think, to recognize, okay, we just saw a Quakes team in a tournament, and we saw them get to a particular point, and they weren't, I don't think if they play that Minnesota United team another 5 times, they'd win more than one game. So there is a ceiling, there's an upside that I think has to be dealt with in a reality where, whether it's players or whether he needs to be able to bring more variety to his schemes, he needs to be able to make changes in game that we haven't really been able to see him make tactically to adjust to what other teams are doing to them. But the changes need to be major if the results are going to be vastly different.
I mean, look, Jamon, I think that ceiling is entirely determined by the purse that he has available to him, the amount of money that this ownership is willing to put into the team, and the players that they are willing to sign and put at Almeida's disposal to work with, right? And I think games like this just show the gulf between the Quakes and the top contenders in MLS. Did LAFC tactically outmaneuver San Jose? Obviously, they pressed them really well. They closed down in the right spaces. They prevented San Jose from playing out of the back. We're going to talk about all that. But it wasn't just the tactics. LAFC are simply a better team. They have a more talented group of players. And that's the bottom line. They invest more in their squad, and they get better results. And if the Quakes want to be on the level of LAFC, or if they want to start getting consistent results and consistently making the playoffs, they need that sort of investment.
I should make it very clear that Matias Almeida won his titles at his 3 previous clubs in the first year. So it only took 3 months into his Chivas tenure to lift his first trophy, and in his first season and his only season with River Plate, his boyhood club, he was able to get them from the 2nd division to the 1st division, and he did the same with Banfield in the same period of time. We are going to go ahead and transition over to a quick video of Matias Almeida responding to a question asked by Alicia Rodriguez.
La realidad es que sabemos que nos enfrentamos siempre a un equipo realmente importante.
The reality is that we always know we're going against an important team.
Desde su juego hasta cada uno de sus jugadores.
From their game and each one of their players.
Y con estos rivales hay una cosa sumamente importante.
And against these opponents, there's something that's even more important.
Es mantener 95% la concentración.
Is maintain 95% concentration.
Y la atención sobre todo de lo que planificamos, de lo que estudiamos del rival, de la parte individual y colectiva.
And attention with what we've studied about the opponent, what we set up with the game plan individually and collectively.
Pero siendo consciente que cuando te equivocas, este rival lastima.
But I'm aware that whenever you make a mistake against this team, they hurt you.
Nuestro equipo después de Orlando,
Our team after Orlando,
tuvo un cambio muy grande a nivel futbolístico.
had a very big change at the football level.
Para peor.
For the worse.
Entonces los días de entrenamiento son más cortos.
So training session days are shorter.
La búsqueda por saber con quién se puede contar y con quién no para el próximo torneo los tengo que ver en cancha.
The search to see who I can count on and who I can count on for the next season remains on the field.
La incertidumbre que un día entrenás, al otro día no podés entrenar por el humo, al otro día jugás, al otro día no jugás. Son todas cosas que suman, que no suman, sino que restan.
The uncertainty that one day you train, another day you can't because of the smoke, one day you play, the other day you can't. But they're all things that don't add, they subtract.
No es un pretexto.
It's not a pretext.
Sí es una realidad.
It is a reality.
¿Por qué es una realidad?
Why is it a reality?
Porque para que este equipo sea competitivo,
Because for this team to be competitive,
tiene que jugar al 200% de concentración y entrega.
they have to play with their 200% concentration and delivery,
Y animarse a jugar como lo hizo en Orlando, donde vivimos con pasión, con amor, 40 días de fútbol.
and they're to play the way they did in Orlando, in which we lived 40 days with passion and love.
El tiempo es corto para el trabajo y para corregir los errores.
There's a short amount of time to work and correct mistakes.
Y de acá a fin de campeonato será una etapa muy difícil.
And from here to the end of the season is going to be a very difficult phase.
Lucharemos para cambiarla,
We'll fight to change it,
pero muchas veces hablar con la realidad sirve.
but many times talking about reality helps.
For this team, in order to be competitive, they have to give 200% physically and mentally. Matias couldn't make it more clear to his players last night. In a loss that showed that the Quakes are second fiddle to teams like LAFC, not only last night, but historically, and that they have major holes to fill in the midfield, that they need to learn how to play off the back, that they need to learn how to defend, because this team is the worst defensively in the league. Alex.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Joel. They've allowed 18 goals in 7 games now, which means they own the worst defensive record in Major League Soccer at this point this season. And I guess I can't say I'm entirely surprised. They've been really sloppy playing out of the back all year. That's how they gave away a couple goals in these last 2 games. Thompson had an error against LAFC, as did Beeson. And then they've also been overrun on set pieces. That's how they allowed all 3 goals against the Galaxy. Add on top of that, Daniel Vega has also been patchy in goal. It's just so clear that this team needs to invest in another goalkeeper and another center back this winter. I think if you look at the back line in the second half against LAFC, it was Lopez, Beeson, Youngworth, and Marie. Obviously, Almeida's trying to get a look at some of the younger guys, but they were so obviously outmatched by LAFC. It reminded me of that time a couple of years ago when Florian Youngworth got in trouble for saying it was like boys playing against men. The talent differential was just so egregious that it seemed to me they were just almost set up for failure.
Yeah, like I said, there was a high amount of ineptitude just trying to even play out last night. And keep in mind, Alanis is injured. And one of the key reasons that you're seeing Youngworth and Beeson together is because that's the way that they work in practice. That's the way that they worked in preseason. There's two teams here. The first kind of the first and the second from a practice perspective, but also typically from a starting perspective. The combinations are Kashi and Alanis and Beeson and Youngworth. And the reason that they are together out there is because Almeida felt better with Alanis being injured to put the 2 of them out there as a combination, because Youngworth is probably asked to be able to guide Beeson. But unfortunately, as you mentioned, there were a significant number of mistakes that happened in the back last night. Now, you don't expect that type of thing from Tommy Thompson to make that type of mistake very often, but it was very costly, and it got them quickly back on their heels. And sometimes when a team gives up a goal, you see them immediately battle back and put the pressure the other way. That never happened. The pressure kept coming, and the team just kept capitulating to the pressure. And it would be a mental mistake here, a passing mistake here. It was one right after another, really almost a comedy of errors.
Obviously, the Quakes were also without Osvaldo Alanis and Carlos Fierro, who are recovering from back injuries, according to a team spokesman. The Quakes are looking very dire at the moment, I would say. One piece of that quote that really stuck with me was when Matias said that everything's pretty much turned on its head following their arrival from Orlando. And I know that they're going to use these next couple of months in what has been pretty much a unprecedented season to be a time of experimenting, right? They're going to try and field younger players. They're going to look for players who haven't much playing time during the Almeida era. But my question is at the expense of what, right? The patience is so thin at Earthquakes Way. The patience is really so thin that is it really worth going down this path? I think that's a question that needs to be asked, and I think the answer is no, right? The blatant answer, the most obvious answer is that no fan wants to go through this again. Now, another piece of last night that I think really complicated the Quakes night was the high press from LAFC. We know that the Quakes initially did that with ease. You know, that was a part of Matias's DNA, was the high press, was the control of possession. And even though last night LAFC did not retain most of the possession, even though it was more of a balanced game on that specific end, LAFC really served it to them with that high pressing, Jamon Moore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talked to both Almeida and Shea Salinas, and we've got a clip from Shea, and my question to them was, is this tactical? Why they're having such problems playing out of the back? Is it personnel? Is it some other type of issue? And I actually got different answers from Shea and Almeida, which is some indication. Sure, they're talking to the press. They're only going to give us so much information, right? But the other indication is they might not even be on the same page as to what they need to do in order to get a bit better. But we do have the video from Shea Salinas, so why don't we run that right now?
It's a good point. I think LA sat back a little in the first 15 minutes, and we were able to capitalize and score a goal. And then they started pressing a little higher, and we struggled a little bit. LAFC came out high right away, and we weren't able to break them down very often. I don't think it's a tactical thing. I think it's technical, and it also has to do with our movement. I think we're kind of reacting a little bit and not moving a pass before the ball gets to an area. But I think it's something we can overcome. A team's going to come out and press high the first 15 minutes on us, and it's going to be difficult. I think after that is when we need to settle down, move the ball, and move for each other a little more. So I think at the end of the first half, we had our opportunities to do that, and we did it maybe every other time building out. So it's something we have to look to do is to control the game a little more.
Yeah, I actually take exception with that last part. I don't think in the second half they did. I think the scorelines show that didn't happen. And if you take a look at the data, it also shows that didn't happen. So I took a look at the passing maps for both of these games. Why don't we, I don't know if you get those side by side. Okay, we can. So on the Quakes are on the right side on both of these. By the way, the expected goals on both of these games somewhat similar. The Quakes not getting above 1, but look at LAFC on the right. First off, passing 73.4 is extremely low. You look at where the Quakes were touching the ball, there's not much that's advanced beyond the midline there, and you can see that is the case in both games. And they're trying to, in the ideal world, I think they'd probably be playing through Jackson Ewell. But what teams have done is if Jackson's going to get on the ball, they're forcing him with his back to goal, and they're forcing him to play more of a backward pass, and then they continue to bring the pressure whenever that backward pass is made, and those players have not been able to deal with it. Quite often it goes back to Daniel Vega, and it's kicked long. And then, it goes to, let's say Vaca is able to get on it. Well, he's being double teamed, and he immediately turns over the ball because he tries to turn and go into the pressure. This team is missing a key player in the center. I think, Joel, you mentioned they're missing a key central midfielder here. Someone who's been able to do that for them in the past was Anibal Godoy. Someone more recently who's been able to help them with that when people try to take Jackson Ewell out of the game was Magnus Eriksson. They have neither. And Vaco is not that guy to go back and get on the ball and play out of pressure. He's never been that guy. He's not going to be that guy. And so right now, teams have figured that out. And they have cut off the passing lanes to Jackson Ewell or forced him to pass backwards. They then immediately press on the outside backs or the center backs, whoever has the ball, recycle it back to Vega, and now the ball's lost because Vega's just not that keeper who can play with his feet and be able to move the ball at will around to different parts of the pitch. Yes, he was an improvement on Andrew Tarbell, but to be quite honest, he's not as good as JT and maybe not Matt Bersano either. And I think this is really hurting the team right now is the fact that they just don't have the right personnel to be able to get back. And a lot of that does go on the goalkeeper. The goalkeeper has to make the right decisions as to where the ball goes. He's operating with the least amount of pressure. He has to figure out where to be able to break the opposition down and find holes in the press. Vega's not been able to do that. And, it causes these turnovers right back in their face. And now you're looking at multiple goal games against you because you can't even play through pressure.
Look, Jamon, I don't think it's just Vega's fault. I think it's also, in large part, the center backs. What teams are doing is they're pressing really hard on the wings and in the midfield, pressing Ewell and Judson and the fullbacks really hard. And they're letting Beeson and Youngworth or whoever the center backs are have time on the ball because they know that they're not particularly good distributing the ball. So I think the solution for the Quakes is to go into the transfer market this winter and buy a ball-playing center back who can play some of those incisive passes. And in part, I think that's Alanis. I think Alanis has more of that passing range, and it's been unfortunate that he's been out with injury these last two games. But I definitely think, look, Alanis, Graham Kasia, Florian Youngworth, they're all over 30 years old. I think Kasia and Alanis are 33, or it might be Kasia and Youngworth who are 33. Regardless, the Quakes need to invest in another center back this winter. I think Almeida was testing Tanner Beeson. He was giving Beeson a shot at playing for that starting position and winning that starting position. But I don't think he's convinced anyone at this stage that he should be a starting center back for San Jose next year. So I think they need to go into the transfer market for that addition. And then also, as you say, they need a number 10. They need to replace Magnus Eriksson with a number 10 who can unlock the opposition with that key pass and distribute the ball to the wingers going forward.
You're right, Alex. It is worth mentioning that Osvaldo Alanis was out last night. And as we know, I think we all agree that Alanis is cut from a different cloth. Definitely one of the three better players that this team has. Not having him last night was very evident. We could tell that he was greatly missed. Put simply, this team didn't defend last night. They didn't know how to defend. They were ball watching too much. Tyler Beeson was probably at fault for at least 2 to 3 goals. And, I get it. He has potential. He has shown glimpses of hope. He is a left-footed center back. Those are hard to find, especially in the American soccer landscape. And given his path to pro, given that he came from Stanford, a collegiate player drafted by the Quakes, has shown promise. But last night and the night before, I would say that he hasn't shown enough to say that he's ready to be a starter game in and game out. Collectively, though, the Quakes played obviously woefully, and individually, if we look at it at a micro level, a lot of lowlights. Some of those, in my opinion, were Andy Rios, who has been absent, I would say, this entire season. Another one that is pretty evident is, as I mentioned, Beeson, and one that a lot of fans have been mentioning on social media throughout this entire time is Daniel Vega. Where do we start with these players? What is the solution, in your opinion, Alex Morgan?
I think there's lots of changes that need to be made, Joel. I think first and foremost, I think that JT Marcinkowski or Matt Bersano needs to be given a shot in goal because Daniel Vega, I think, has let made too many errors this season, let too many balls trickle past him into the back of the net. Against LAFC, he sort of flapped at a corner, or I think that was the Galaxy actually, and allowed them to score. And it's amazing to me that Almeida is willing to field the back line with Lopez, Beeson, Youngworth, and Marie, and yet he still won't give JT Marcinkowski a shot in goal, right? To me, that's I guess the ultimate vote of no confidence in him. I know last week we spoke about it on the show. He said that he views Matt Bersano and JT Marcinkowski as roughly even, as equivalent players, and he wouldn't know who to choose. But I think he has to choose one of them because Daniel Vega is out of contract at the end of this year, and I don't think that any reasonable observer would say that the Quakes should re-sign him next year and that he'll be the starting goalkeeper for this team next year.
Alex, I strongly disagree with you. I think this is the worst time to bring a young JT Marcinkowski on board into the starting 11, and I'll tell you why. JT Marcinkowski, as we know, is a homegrown player. He happens to be one of the Quakes' biggest promises, a player that has been a part of the team for the last couple of years now. The last thing you would want to do for a player like Marcinkowski is throw him in the dumpster fire. You don't want to put a player of his age with his experience and have him eat 5 to 6 goals on a Wednesday night. That is not what you want to do for the morale of the player. That is not what you want to do for his development. And that's definitely not what you want on his resume. I think, and I still stand by this, I think the smartest option here is to stick with Vega, who has shown that he can step up in certain situations. He had a phenomenal save last night. He's earned the Quakes point in the past. He's a veteran, and he has some leadership within the locker room. Matt Bersano wouldn't be a bad option, of course. But then again, we haven't seen much of Matt Bersano in MLS in general, so you don't know what you're going to get from Bersano.
Yeah, I side more with Alex on this one. Look, you've got to give them both a shot. You've got to give Matt Bersano his shot. You've got to give JT his shot. If you're not going to give him a shot, send him to Reno and make sure that they get games. And here's where the Quakes are struggling right now. They've got these youngsters. They need time. They can't play in Reno unless they send them on a season-ending loan, right? So, and they're in certain parts of the roster that in some cases doesn't make sense to move them. So, for instance, right, it's not like you can take a homegrown player, send them to Reno for the end of the year, and all of a sudden get, a roster spot back to go out and sign a DP. It's not the way it works. Right, you have certain roster spots that are used on certain types of players. So you need to figure out a plan in which you're going to give them the opportunity. Alex mentioned that maybe the Quakes need to go out and look for a goalkeeper next year. Well, how do you know? How do you know? And I've talked with coaches who know JT, who know Matt. A couple of them that I've talked to are A-level coaches that coach JT in the academy and above. And look, they say he needs a shot. He deserves a shot. He is who you want as the goalkeeper of the future, which is exactly what Jesse Fiorinelli also told us. So it's time to figure that out. Now, I'm not saying that you have to give every game to these guys, but I'm saying you have to give them a shot. You have to give them an opportunity. Now, I wouldn't do it in front of Tanner Beeson and Florian Youngworth as a combination. I might do it in front of Alanis and Kasia, or I still want to see Alanis and Youngworth. And by the way, remember when Almeida told us that Youngworth couldn't play right center back? Guess what he's played the last 2 games?
Right center
back. Okay, so let's try Alanis and Youngworth, who we know have worked well together, or can work well together.
Those are the 2 best they have.
It's the 2 best they have. And let's give JT some protection in front, right? And let's see how it goes, or let's give Matt a shot. It doesn't so much matter. They both performed extremely well for Ian at Reno. I know Ian would vouch for both of those guys and say that they both deserve their opportunity, and he would be right. They need the opportunity to do something. You can't be throwing out these other players and go like, yeah, but for goalkeeper, no. But because Daniel Vega has made some significant mistake, whether it's ended up in the goal or not, he's made some mistake almost every single game this season. He made one last night in the opening seconds of the game practically. So while I agree with you, Joel, last year he really was a huge step up for the Quakes, given their experience with Andrew Tarbell. This season, his numbers are woeful. They are worst in the league in certain categories. It's time for some sort of change in that area. But yes, you're right. He has to be a bit protected. It can't be thrown to the wolves. But hey, he played for Steve Ralston back in 2018. So that was about as thrown to the wolves as you can possibly get. And he lived through that and was able and didn't destroy his confidence. He did find the next year when given his opportunities in Reno, he was actually fantastic. I think the experience is what's going to make him stronger.
Speaking of theoretical 11s moving forward, there were some somewhat bright spots on the Quakes end last night, and I would say that two of those, or the only two really, were Marcos Lopez obviously making a return after a couple of setbacks, an injury, not really being at the top of Almeida's pecking order, and Danny Husen, who has found himself on the outside looking in more often than not. Marcos Lopez earning a secondary assist on a Danny Husen goal that came and ended that atrocious drought that the Quakes earned themselves against LAFC. Maybe you guys can help me out with whatever that stat line was. But these two players could probably be players that Matias can rely on moving forward, because they obviously need changes. I mean, they're going to have to look within the team, look around, see what players they can rely on. I think that's a good starting point, along with Alanis and Fierro, perhaps.
Go ahead, Alex.
I think so, Joel. I mean, with Danny, it's a difficult situation because he's also out of contract at the end of the year. And I can't imagine that he wants to re-sign for this team, given that he's been out of the starting lineup for so long. And with Lopez, he's playing behind Tommy Thompson and Nick Lima right now, who Almeida has a lot of confidence in. Personally, I think I would like to see more of Lopez in these next couple games, especially because Tommy Thompson looks so overrun against LAFC and against the Galaxy. He had some good moments going forward down the right wing. He is, I think, a really good movement and pattern with Christian Espinosa down that wing. But in the defense, he was absolutely shredded by Christian Pavon, and he obviously gave away that goal with that error against LAFC. So you can tell that his legs are tired, and I think that Marcos Lopez is a great answer, a great substitute there at fullback position.
Yeah, I would definitely consider Lopez and Maria as starters for the next game. Why not? They're going to be a bit more fresh. I think they did better than the starters did in the last game. And look, the Quakes have got to figure out what they're going to do about Nick Lima. I think we've said that a lot on this show. But he's not having stellar performances at the left back position that he was capable of having at the right back position. He's very average as a left back right now in this league. So why not see what you've got with Marcos Lopez? I think it's a good option. He was key on the goal last night. For the striker position, it's an interesting thing. I know there's a lot of naysayers out there about Rios, but let's be honest about Rios for 1 second. He's in the wrong position. He's not a lone striker. He's an underneath forward. So Almeida is asking him to play out of position. What you should be judging is that Almeida is not putting him in a chance to succeed, and that's the way I look at it. I believe if he was put in the right position, he could succeed. But you do have a gap at a number 9. You have Danny Husen. Maybe we can see some resurgence there, but I think you know what you're going to get with Danny. You have Wanda, who is not really going to be your guy anymore for 96 minutes of a game. So, some people want to see Cade Cowell. Okay, Cade. Almeida thinks Cade's a winger. Can we try him up top and see what he does there? See if he's better. But your biggest problem when you can't even play out the back, your biggest problem is not your striker guys. They're not the issue. He's barely touching the ball. So, you're going to need the striker to be able to do some hold-up play and things like that as helping to get you out, but they're not even getting the ball to him at this point. And so, to me, that's the biggest problem. You got to find a way to be able to get the striker into opportunities where he can actually be effective on the ball and hopefully create an opportunity to score. They're not even getting those opportunities right now. Everything behind the striker needs to get fixed so that we can have a fair way of looking at Andy Rios. We're not getting that right now. I do think that we need to understand by the end of the season whether Rios is a starter or whether Rios is a bench player. And that should make decisions and inform some of the 4 signings that are going to be made. If he shows that he can be the starter when he's given service, fine. Then get the players who can get him better service. But if he doesn't show it and he's getting the opportunities, okay, now it's time to look elsewhere.
He looked a bit more dangerous in Orlando. He was getting the service inside the box, and some of those he buried. Others he almost got him in. I mean, look, I think Rios has been one of the most disappointing players on the field the last 2 games, without a doubt. But as you mentioned, Jamon, I think he's being asked to do too much and way out of position. I mean, yesterday I recall Rios almost being in the Quakes' own 18 box and having to play out of the back from that starting position. That is not sustainable for any striker at any team. No matter what system you play, you cannot be playing that far back behind. The Quakes return to action this Saturday at Earthquake Stadium after a couple of months of not playing here in San Jose. The game will be happening at 7:30 against the Rapids, who have been up and down, I'd say. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We have really enjoyed your company. We see that the chat is fairly active. We have more than 40 people tuning in. We are missing, obviously, Charles Wollin, our great host, who is taking the night off. He's resting. He's getting some rest, but he will be back with us very soon. I want to take a couple of minutes here to just go through the chat and maybe answer some of the questions that you viewers might have for us. Thank you again, like I said, for everyone who's tuned in. We see that there has been a lot of back and forth between you all here. One question that really stood out to me is from Brian, who comments, late to the party, if it hasn't been discussed yet, which players are out of contract after this season? Alex.
I can take that one, Joel. Brian, I would recommend you look at a resource that Colin Etnier runs. He runs a salary spreadsheet, and that has basically all of the information that we know about the current state of San Jose's roster. I think you can find the link to that on Quakes Epicenter. Colin Etnier is a contributor there. Off the top of my head, it's a lot of players who are out of contract this season. Guram Kasia, Danny Husen, Guram Kasia, Danny Husen, Vako Kuzvashvili, Daniel Vega. I know Alanis is also on a 1-year loan, so he'll be out of contract at the end of the year. Chris Wondolowski, Shea Salinas, and then there's a couple of other guys. I think Paul Marie is as well. It's going to be a transitional year for this team.
Is it though? I have to ask. I have to play devil's advocate here, Alex. Is it though? If Jesse only promised 2 to 4 players by the start of next season?
I think it depends, Joe. I think he promised 2 players this summer, it's already September. 1 to 2 players this summer, so we are eagerly awaiting a new addition. I think that's much needed. This was, of course, recently he talked to Elliot Almond of the San Jose Mercury News, and he had also talked to us last winter in an interview with Yumi and Jamon, and he said the Quakes are going to buy a DP attacking midfielder. So we are eagerly waiting those additions, Joel. So 1 to 2 players this summer, and then I think they need another 2 players this winter. And if they get 4 starting level players, then I think it's a transformational year for this team. But they have to be the right players, right? I mean, at this time last year, they signed Carlos Fierro and Andy Rios, And those were the players that we expected to take this team to the next level, and they haven't. So they have to sign the right players this winter. I think it's do or die.
Jamon, where do you stand on all this? Is 4 players enough for Almeida to take this team to an MLS Cup or any type of silverware?
Yeah, I think in the right positions, 4 players can do it. I think if you bring in the impact starting number 9, I think if you bring in the impact 10 who can play both ways and put good pressure on teams, I believe you have the wingers already. You've got Cade Cowell, you've got Christian Espinoza. You know, unless you're looking to sell him, you've got Jackson Ewell, you've got Judson. What you really need is that 10. You really need that 9, and now you need to look at one of the outside back positions. Whoever is not stepping up and performing out of the foursome, and the starter. You go with one of those starters. Move Nick back to right back. Go with Tommy, whatever the decision is, and fix the other position. And then you need to go to right center back. And if Florian Youngworth is not going to be your guy, Guram Kachia is no longer going to be your guy. You've got to get an Alanis level right center back to pair with him. And then you need to fix the keeper position. You either got to go with JT, or you're going to go back out to the transfer market and try to get, you know, something that's at least Daniel Vega quality, hopefully without as many of the errors. And that's why I think you got to give JT a shot, because you need to know if that position needs to be one of the 4 players. That's why it's so key.
Jamon, I'm not sure that everything's been figured out in the wing positions yet, because I'm not sure if Cade Cowell is ready to step into that role. I think that his goal against the Galaxy gave us a really good glimpse of his potential, how he's got the acceleration and the physicality and the technique. But with that said, I think these last 2 games have also shown us that he's got a long way to go. He really struggled to get involved for long periods of the game. I think he had the fewest touches of any starter against LAFC. And I'm not entirely convinced by his decision-making at this point. I think sometimes he panics in tight spaces. And he's also prone to taking these long touches and giving the ball away. So I think those concerns tempered my excitement. I think, look, that's okay. It's going to take time for Cowell to be a more fully formed player. Even somebody like Alphonso Davies also took a while to get acclimated to this level of play at such a young age. He spent like a year going in and out of the lineup at Vancouver before he really broke onto the scene. So Cade's got time, and I think if he works really hard over the offseason, he could be a consistent contributor next year. But I don't know if he's ready to be the starting winger for this team.
And he may not be, but there's other options there, right? If they signed Shea Salinas for another year,
Fierro as well.
Other winger options.
I thought Fierro did well when he got chances in Orlando. And look, I get it. Fierro hasn't clicked. He has not. He hasn't scored wearing the black and blue, but he's a player that you really, really have to experiment with. You have to give him chances. I would want to say that they've overpaid for him. They did. I mean, they matched what he was earning in Mexico at Cruz Azul, a club that pays very well. He's making close to $1 million. Is he worth that? Probably not. But that's what you have. And the Quakes have tied themselves to that contract as well. So you have to go out there and give him a shot. We have another question here from Joshua. It reads, if the Quakes lose on Saturday, should we, the front office, Almeida, and fans begin to worry? If not, when should we begin to worry? Well, I would say that it would make no difference if the Quakes lost on Saturday, aside from their standing on the table. I think that the Quakes are definitely in a close or in an emergency situation. They've been in this situation for some time now. I think the majority of individuals have been, molded to think that the Quakes had already moved on to a different era. Yes, it was very symbolic that the Quakes, and obviously not only symbolic, but it was a huge move to land Matias Almeida. There's no downplaying that. But really, the reality here is that the Quakes are strapped. They're chained to a lot of contracts that Fiorinelli made a couple of years back when Mikel Starri was still around. And I've said this time and time again. The Almeida era is really going to start next season. Now, I'm really concerned because after what I heard from Matias, I don't think 4 players is enough, Alex. I have to disagree with you. I don't think 4 players, unless one of those players is Messi, I don't think the Quakes will win silverware under Matias.
Well, I don't think the Quakes are going to win silverware anytime soon, Joel. But I think with 4 players, this team has a better chance of making the playoffs, of finishing higher in the Western Conference. I think next year, if they can finish in 3rd or 4th or 5th position, that would be considered an improvement for this team.
Well, we have one more question here that I want to take from Jesus Rojas, and it reads, what's up with Gilbert Fuentes? Obviously, Gilbert came into the league as a highly touted youngster. Reports read that there were several Bundesliga teams interested in his services. Fiorinelli ended up snatching him on what I thought was a good coup. Ever since, we haven't really heard much of Gilbert. He's made a couple of appearances with Reno. Recently, he was out with an injury. He wasn't able to travel with the team to Orlando. He's now 18 years of age. Keep in mind, he arrived at the age of 16. We haven't seen much of Gilbert. I wonder, I'm starting to get a little bit worried on whether him or Jacob are going to be able to really break through under Almeida this year, at least this year, and maybe next year.
I don't think that's happening this year, Joel. Gilbert did have an injury earlier this summer. He had surgery to repair a fractured collarbone, I believe, in late May. That had a 2 to 3 month recovery period. But I think according to the social media posts that the Quakes are putting out, it appears that he's fully training again. So at this point, I think we just have to readjust our expectations for the kind of player that Gilbert might be, right? As a 16-year-old, I think the expectations were that he could be someone that by the time he's 18, 19, 20 is paving his way for a move to Europe. He certainly had interest from European teams at that age. That was one of the reasons why Jesse Fiorinelli moved to sign him to a contract at such a young age. But player development isn't linear. It isn't always straightforward. And so I think we have to readjust our expectations for guys like Gilbert and Jacob.
Yeah, and I recently, talked with Ian Russell about Gilbert and Jacob as well, and one of the things that I think people should probably be aware of is they're not getting regular minutes in Reno. They weren't getting regular minutes in Reno last year, and expecting that somehow they're going to all of a sudden break through that trajectory and be able to start getting a lot of minutes now. I mean, I'd love to see it. I do want to see them get some minutes, but I think it's going to be of the drip and drab variety. And I think there's still some questions as to the type of player Gilbert's going to be and really how he fits into both the Reno and the San Jose systems. When I talked with Ian, he said, hey, I've played him as a 10. I'm not sure that long-term he's going to be a 10. He's a really, really good soccer player, but he's kind of undefinable. He has his own values that don't cleanly fit into a particular position. So that tells me that for him to be successful, you have to surround. So, this is what we're going to have to expect, I think, is that these are still kids and they're going to need time to develop, and they should have been developing in Reno this year, and they're not going to get that opportunity.
Thank you so much for everyone who tuned in tonight. It was a pleasure to be your host tonight. Obviously, we will be having Charles back sooner rather than later. For myself, Jamon, Alex, thank you both for joining us. We will see you very, very soon. Until next time.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.